You'll always have a place here, as staff, Melissa smirked, while Todd reviewed my performance like I was some failed intern. I stood there in the suit I wore to Dad's funeral, watching them tear my name off his legacy like it was duct tape. But it got worse. 30 minutes later, I found an eviction notice taped to my front door, with Melissa's signature at the bottom. My childhood home, gone in 30 days. No warning. No conversation. Just paper. Cold and final. But they made one mistake. Dad didn't know I'd saved everything. 20 years of ledgers, emails, and notarized letters. And they have no idea what's coming. My name is David Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. I manage my father Robert's rental properties. 12 units that smell of his signature garage mix of mineral oil and sawdust. The ledgers I keep are stacked neatly on his old workbench, chronicling every midnight call I've answered and every repair I've made. My sister Melissa, the sharp-tongued corporate lawyer, calls me just the maintenance man, while my brother Todd, the smooth-talking real estate broker, says I'm too soft to negotiate. What they don't know is that I've documented everything, every receipt, every email, every maintenance log since Dad first got sick. They see a simple handyman, missing the fact that 20 years of paperwork tells its own story. But let me start from the beginning. The law firm's conference room felt like a museum, all polished oak and leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. You know those moments when you can feel something bad coming? This was one of them. The air conditioner hummed overhead while we waited for the attorney to begin. I'd spent that morning like any other, fixing a leaky faucet in Unit 6 before heading over. My work clothes felt out of place next to Melissa's tailored suit and Todd's designer casual wear. But Dad had always said honest work leaves honest marks, even if my siblings sneered at my calloused hands. The attorney, Mr. Davidson, cleared his throat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Before we proceed with the standard will reading, I must address this sealed document, received and notarized 3 weeks before Robert's passing. He held up an envelope marked Midnight Trust, supersedes all, in bold letters. My stomach tightened. 3 weeks before passing? Dad could barely recognize faces by then, lost in a morphine haze. Melissa and Todd leaned forward in their chairs, and I caught that familiar gleam in their eyes. The same look they'd get as kids when Dad brought home presents. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence as Davidson broke the seal. By the power vested in this trust, Davidson read, all properties, accounts, and assets previously held by Robert Whitaker are to be transferred in full to Melissa Whitaker and Todd Whitaker, to be divided equally between them. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. I waited for my name, for some mention of the years I'd invested, the midnight calls I'd answered, the maintenance I'd handled, but there was nothing. Just silence, and that damned clock ticking. Dad knew who deserved it, Todd whispered, not quite under his breath. He never was good at hiding his smugness. Melissa was already pulling out her phone, swiping through pictures. Look at these office concepts, she said, turning the screen toward Todd. We can modernize the whole portfolio, starting with the downtown properties. The musty smell of old paper files filled my nostrils as I stared at that trust document. 20 years of my life summed up in an omission. I could still picture Dad's signature on hundreds of checks I'd brought him for repairs, his hand steady and sure. But the signature on this trust, I needed to know when he'd signed it, what state he'd been in. The room's details burned themselves into my memory, the leather chairs creaking as my siblings shifted excitedly, the afternoon sun slanting through vertical blinds, the family photos on the wall that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's history. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The envelope sat there on the table, its golden seal catching the light. I picked it up, studying the embossing, trying to find some clue in its official markings. David, Melissa called out as I headed for the door. I paused, hand on the handle. You know you've always had a place here. As staff. Her words hit like a slap. Could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The years of resentment at my closer relationship with Dad finally finding their outlet. The conference room suddenly felt too small, too tight, like all the air had been sucked out. The maintenance position will, of course, need to be reviewed, Todd added, shuffling papers importantly. We'll be modernizing operations. I looked back at them one last time. My sister with her perfectly styled hair, my brother with his practiced smile, both of them already dividing up the empire I'd helped build. The trust document lay between them like a knife that had finally found its mark. Through the window, I could see Dad's favorite rental property, the brick duplex where he'd started his business. The same duplex where I now lived, managing the whole portfolio from the ground floor unit. The same home that, according to that trust, wasn't mine anymore. A week after the will reading, I spread my evidence across the conference room table, like a card player showing his hand. 20 years of meticulous record-keeping laid bare. Maintenance logs color-coded by property, utility payments highlighted in yellow, emergency repair receipts paperclipped to tenant correspondence. You know how Dad was about documentation. I learned that from him. Look, I said, pointing to entries from last winter. The Harrison Street furnace went out during that cold snap. Remember, you both had your phones off and Dad was deep in chemo. I fronted the replacement cost, 12 grand, because tenants had no heat. My finger slid down the page. And here, the Madison Avenue roof leak. Another 8,000 I covered when Dad couldn't sign checks. Melissa examined her manicure while Todd scrolled through his phone. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the papers they wouldn't even glance at. There's more, I continued, pulling out a thick folder of emails. Every monthly report I sent Dad, every decision we made together about improvements. 20 years of sweat equity in these buildings. The familiar scent of printer toner mixed with the coffee going cold beside me. I'm not asking for everything, just my fair share of what I helped build. Todd finally looked up, that practiced smile of his firmly in place. Look, Dave, we appreciate your odd jobs over the years. Send us an invoice for any outstanding maintenance work. He waved his hand dismissively, but Dad's final intent was clear. Final intent? My voice rose despite my effort to keep it steady. He signed that trust on morphine, Todd. You know how out of it he was those last weeks. The trust is legally binding, Melissa cut in, her tone sharp as a paper cut. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. If you're having trouble accepting that, well, she shrugged. That's your problem, not ours. I tried everything over the next 2 weeks. Scheduled follow-up meetings they never showed up for. Drafted detailed emails that got one-line responses or nothing at all. Even proposed a compromise. Let me keep managing the properties I'd always handled. Split the profits 3 ways. Their response? Complete radio. Silence. You ever watch a wall of ice form? It starts with a thin sheet, barely visible. Then it builds, layer by layer, until it's solid enough to break your hand against. That's what their indifference became. A wall of entitled silence nothing could crack. I was sitting in my truck outside the office one afternoon, watching Todd through the window as he updated his LinkedIn profile. Managing Partner, Whitaker Properties. The new title read. On his desk sat the framed photo of Dad teaching us to fish. The one where I'm helping Todd bait his hook because he couldn't stand touching worms. Melissa's voice drifted out the open window. We need to modernize the family portfolio's image. New logo, new website. Really distance ourselves from the mom and pop feel. She was talking to some marketing firm, plotting to erase every trace of how Dad built this business, one modest property at a time. The spring evening air bit cold through my open window. I had one card left to play, a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. But watching my siblings in there, plotting their takeover like I'd never existed, my chest felt hollow. Years of fixing frozen pipes, calming angry tenants, and keeping Dad's dream alive. All of it meant nothing against that midnight trust. My phone buzzed. Melissa's text lit up the screen. You're welcome to appeal, if you enjoy losing. I stared at that smiling emoji, remembering how she used to beg me to check under her bed for monsters when we were kids. Now she was the monster under the bed, and no amount of Big Brother protection would change that. I'd just finished a sandwich in my truck when I saw it. That sickly yellow paper fluttering on my front door like some kind of toxic butterfly. You know that feeling when your stomach drops before your brain even processes why? Yeah, that hit me hard. The notice was crisp, official looking. Probably fresh from some legal printer that morning. Notice to vacate, it screamed in bold letters that made my eyes sting. 30 days. They were giving me 30 days to clear out of the duplex I'd called home for 20 years. My hands shook as I yanked it off the door. There at the bottom, Melissa's signature curved across the line in perfect penmanship. The same way she used to practice writing her name in junior high, over and over until every loop was just so. Now those perfect loops were signing away my home. Inside, I dropped into the kitchen chair Dad had helped me refinish years ago. The calendar on my wall, the one tracking tenant maintenance schedules, suddenly looked like a countdown to doomsday. I grabbed a red marker and started counting weeks, my finger trailing across the dates until it stopped at the circled deadline. 4 weeks, 28 days, 672 hours to pack up 2 decades of life. Ever notice how time feels different when it's running out? The kitchen clock might as well have been screaming at me. Each tick another second I couldn't afford to waste. My phone buzzed. Mrs. Henderson from Unit 4 at the Madison property, reporting a leaky faucet. For the first time in 20 years, I had to tell a tenant no. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tasting bitter. "You'll need to contact the new management." I could hear the confusion in her voice as she asked what new management. Yeah, that made two of us wondering. I hung up and looked around my office space. Really just a corner of the living room where I'd kept Dad's business running all these years. Stacks of rent ledgers lined the shelves, each one filled with my careful notations. The latest one still had entries from just last week, back when I thought I was building something lasting. The familiar smell of old paper and leather bindings hit me as I gathered the ledgers. Dad used to sit right here, coughing into his handkerchief, while we went over the monthly numbers. Even when the cancer had him down to skin and bones, he'd insist on reviewing every detail. "Always keep good records, David," he'd say, between coughs. "Paper trails don't lie." I cleared the kitchen table and grabbed a legal pad. At the top, I wrote, Day 130 in block letters, then started breaking down what needed doing. First thing tomorrow, find a lawyer. Someone who'd look at that midnight trust with fresh eyes and tell me if there was any chance of fighting back. The sun was setting when I stepped onto the front stoop, casting long shadows across the parking lot. That yellow notice crinkled in the evening breeze. They'd taped a copy to every door in the duplex. I walked the property's edge, counting the other units. How many more eviction notices had Melissa printed? How many other lives were they planning to uproot? Standing there in the growing dark, I remembered helping Dad install these security lights. How proud he was when we finished. "Good work takes time," he'd said, clapping my shoulder. "But it lasts." Now I had 30 days to prove if that was true. I pulled out my phone and set a reminder for first thing tomorrow. Legal consultation, 8 a.m. Then I added another. Document everything. Because whatever happened next, I wasn't going down without a fight. And I sure as hell wasn't going down without proof. A car drove past slowly. Probably just a neighbor, but these days, who knew? Could be Melissa or Todd checking if I'd found their little surprise. My jaw clenched as I watched those brake lights disappear around the corner. 30 days. The clock was ticking. 3 law firms in one day. Ever tried watching your last hope die 3 separate times? Let me tell you, it doesn't get easier with practice. The first place was one of those glass and chrome buildings downtown. The kind where you feel underdressed just walking through the lobby. The attorney, Walsh or Welsh, something like that, barely looked up from the trust document as he shook his head. "No grounds for capacity challenge," he said, sliding the papers back across his mahogany desk. "Notarization's clean, witnesses are solid. You'd need concrete evidence your father was incompetent when he signed." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos. He was on morphine that whole week. "I've got the medical records." "Mr. Whitaker." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Unless you can prove he was actively hallucinating while signing, the trust stands. That'll be $300 for the consultation." The second firm was smaller, downtown in one of those converted Victorian houses. The lawyer there, a woman with kind eyes that made the rejection worse, at least took time to explain why I was screwed. "It's what we call an inter vivos trust," she said, pointing to key paragraphs. "Created while your father was alive, properly executed, clear intent. The midnight filing is unusual but not illegal." She pushed a retainer agreement across the desk. "I could file challenges, but you'd be looking at 50,000 minimum, with slim chances." My truck's dashboard clock read 2:47 p.m. when I pulled up to the last office. You know that feeling when you're about to spend money you don't have on something you know won't work? Yeah, that was churning in my gut as I walked in. This guy didn't even sit down. He scanned the trust while standing at his desk, making little humming sounds that might as well have been nails in my coffin. "Binding," he announced, handing it back. "Whoever drafted this knew what they were doing. Trust me, I've tried breaking better ones." His receptionist called, "Good luck," as I left. She meant well, but those words landed like a judge's gavel. Final verdict. No legal remedy available. I sat in my truck, watching the sun creep toward horizon. 25 days left. The duplex courtyard lights were clicking on, one by one, like they had every evening for 20 years. Mrs. Henderson's unit, then the Crawfords, then old Mr. Peterson's. Each light a reminder of the community I'd helped build. And now I had to watch it all slip away. Remember when you were a kid and your parents' word was absolute truth? Even after you grow up, some part of you keeps believing they'll do right by you. That's what kept gnawing at me. Did Dad really mean to cut me out completely? After all those late-night maintenance calls I answered, all those weekends I spent fixing up his properties while Melissa and Todd chased their fancy careers, I pulled up my email, typed out one last try to my dear siblings. Melissa, Todd. I'm proposing mediation, neutral third party. Split the cost. We can work this out without destroying what Dad built. Please consider it. Hit send. Watched the little whoosh animation. Knew in my gut it would bounce off their wall of silence like everything else had. The dome light in my truck cast a sickly yellow glow across that eviction notice as midnight rolled around. 25 days. The paper was starting to get soft at the creases from how many times I'd folded and unfolded it, like maybe the words would change if I just looked at them one more time. You want to know the worst part of being backed into a corner? It's not the fear, though that's bad enough. It's not even the humiliation. It's that moment when you realize everyone who should be on your side, family, law, even your own father's signature, they're all saying the same thing. No. I smoothed out that notice one more time under the dome. Light. What leverage did I have left? The law said the trust was solid. Blood apparently meant nothing. 2 decades of sweat equity counted for 0. My fingers traced Melissa's perfect signature at the bottom, remembering how she used to practice it over and over in her school notebooks. Now it was signing away my home. I'd love to tell you I faced that night with dignity, but truth is, I couldn't bear going inside. Just reclined the truck seat behind the duplex, staring at the bedroom window. I wouldn't be seeing much longer. Funny how a place can be both home and torture chamber, depending on the hour. The seat springs dug into my back all night. Same springs I'd been meaning to fix for months. Now it didn't seem worth the effort. My phone showed 5 missed calls. 2 wrong numbers, 1 telemarketer, and 2 maybe contacts that turned out to be dead ends. Ever notice how the universe likes to kick you when you're already down? Around 4 a.m., the security light clicked off, plunging everything into that weird pre-dawn gray, the kind of dark that makes you question every decision you've ever made. I watched shadows creep across the parking lot, remembering how Dad used to say, "Dawn's the time for fresh starts." Well, this dawn just felt like yesterday's problems wearing a different coat. By 5:30, my back was screaming, and my mouth tasted like old pennies. The village diner down on Marshall Street would be opening up. They had coffee that could wake the dead, which was pretty much how I felt. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. That sound took me right back to Sunday mornings with Dad, back when he was teaching me the rental business. Always check the properties early, he'd say. Shows the tenants you care. Now his other kids were showing how much they didn't. I was halfway to the counter when I heard, "David? Robert's boy?" The voice came from a booth by the window. Ron Pierce. Dad's business partner for what? 30 years? He was nursing a coffee, looking exactly like I remembered. Wire-rimmed glasses, plain white shirt, that heavy silver watch he never took off. "Thought that was you," he said, waving me over. "You're still keeping your father's hours. Haven't you noticed how some people just radiate trustworthiness?" Ron was like that. Steady, no BS. The kind of guy who'd tell you hard truth because he respected you enough not to lie. I slid into the booth across from him. The vinyl seat was cracked in familiar places. "Been a while, Ron. Too long." He studied my face. "You look like hell, son." That broke something loose in me. Maybe it was hearing son without mockery. Or maybe I was just too tired to keep up walls. The whole story came pouring out. The midnight trust, the eviction notice, 24 days left until I lost everything. Even heard myself say things I hadn't admitted out loud before, about feeling betrayed not just by Melissa and Todd, but by Dad himself. Ron listened without interrupting, just sipped his coffee and watched me with those sharp eyes behind the glasses. When I finally ran dry, he set his cup down carefully, like he was choosing his next words. "Your father signed that trust on morphine," he said quietly. "Last week of hospice care. They brought the papers when he could barely hold the pen." My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. "They? Melissa and Todd." Ron's voice had an edge now. "They managed the paperwork situation, kept certain people away, brought in their own notary. Very efficient about it." The implications hit me like a hammer. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying Robert's real instructions existed." He leaned forward, dropping his voice lower. "Someone buried them, and I don't mean in the ground. You know that moment when a locked door inside you suddenly rattles? When something you couldn't quite name finally has a shape? That's what his words did to me. Can it be proven?" The question came out rough. Ron tapped his fingers on the table twice. Tap, tap, like Morse code for hope. I know where to look. First light was starting to streak the sky outside. Through the diner window I watched it slice through the darkness like a blade. And for the first time since that yellow notice appeared on my door, I felt something else cut through too. Leverage. Ron kept a key to Dad's old storage unit over on Cedar Street. You know those places. Row after row of metal doors, all looking the same except for the numbers. The smell hit me as soon as we rolled up the door. Cardboard and dust, with that hint of mildew that creeps in no matter how careful you are. Your father was meticulous, Ron said, flicking on the fluorescent lights. Everything got filed, even the drafts he didn't use. He wasn't kidding. The place was stacked with bankers' boxes, each one labeled in Dad's precise handwriting. Maple Street Properties, Oakview Apartments, Cedar Heights Complex. 20 years of real estate deals, all documented like he was building a paper fortress. Start with the last 6 months, Ron suggested, pulling down a box marked Current 2023. That's when things started changing. I'd spent enough time in Dad's office to know his system. Everything got dated, everything got copied, everything got filed where you could find it again. The man treated paperwork like it was sacred. Guess that's where I got it from. Here's the property transfer drafts, I said, spreading files across a folding table we'd set up. Look at the revision dates, regular as clockwork until... I tapped a page. 3rd week of March. That's when he went into the hospital. Ron nodded, his glasses catching the fluorescent glare. That tracks. Robert was still lucid then, still making his own calls. We worked through the morning like archaeologists, dusting off layer after layer of Dad's business life. The familiar letterhead of his law firm. Email printouts with his careful notes in the margins. Draft agreements showing how deals evolved. Hold up, Ron said around 11. He was squinting at a folder labeled Instructions, Final. There's a reference here to an attachment. Page 4 mentions enclosed notarized letter dated March 15th. But there's no letter. My heart did a little skip. What kind of letter? Distribution instructions. Ron tapped the empty folder. Your father was old school. Always wanted hard copies with real signatures. I started photographing everything with my phone. The empty folder, the reference page, the revision timestamps. Each click felt like loading ammunition. Then Ron found something else. Look at this escrow receipt, he said. Dated March 28th at 2:15 p.m. But according to the Midnight Trust, the trust was signed that morning at 9 a.m. I felt a smile trying to break through. Kind of hard to sign something after you've already signed something else saying you can't. Every inconsistency went into a new binder I labeled Original Intent Trail. The title felt right. We were tracking Dad's real wishes through the paper jungle, following his breadcrumbs back to the truth. County Records Office opens at 1, I said, checking my watch. Might be worth seeing what they've got. I filed. Smart. Ron closed a box carefully. Robert believed in backup copies. Always said you never know which piece of paper might save you. I set a reminder on my phone for 12:45. The courthouse wasn't far, but I wanted time to clean up and look presentable. Nothing says, take me seriously, like showing up looking like you just spent the morning in a storage unit. Standing there surrounded by Dad's meticulous records, I felt something I hadn't felt since that yellow notice appeared on my door. Clarity. Every missing letter, every timestamp mismatch, every paper trail that dead-ended too conveniently. They were all pieces of a puzzle that was finally taking shape. I hefted the original intent binder, feeling its weight. Maybe it was time to make some calls, see if any of those attorneys who dismissed me might be interested in a second look. After all, nothing gets a lawyer's attention quite like documented irregularities in a trust execution. Your father had a saying, Ron remarked as we started packing up. Want to hide something? Put it in plain sight and hope no one takes the time to really look. I thought about Melissa and Todd, so sure they'd covered their tracks. So confident no one would bother digging through old boxes and dusty papers. Their mistake was forgetting who'd learned filing from the master. The certified letter arrived 3 days after Ron and I started digging. I recognized Melissa's law firm. One of those glass tower places where even the potted plants probably cost more than my truck. You know that feeling when you're about to open something that's going to ruin your day? I stood there in my kitchen, letter opener in hand, remembering how Dad used to say, bad news doesn't improve with age. So I sliced it open clean and fast. The language was all lawyer polished, but Melissa's voice came through clear as a bell. Stop investigating Dad's trust, or face legal consequences for defaming our father's memory and final wishes. They'd thrown in some choice phrases about malicious interference and baseless accusations of diminished capacity. I read it twice, letting each threat sink in. The old me would have folded right there, filed it away under not worth the fight. But something had shifted these past few days. Maybe it was finding those missing documents, or maybe it was just being backed so far into a corner that forward was the only direction left. Remember those summer thunderstorms that used to roll through when we were kids? The air would get thick and heavy, and you could feel the pressure building until something had to break. That's what my kitchen felt like as I stood there holding Melissa's letter. I scanned it to Ron with a quick message. Thoughts? His reply pinged back in under 2 minutes. This is fear talking. 3 words that cut straight through the legal jargon and formal threats. They were scared, which meant we were on the right track. I pulled out my laptop and opened a fresh document. At the top, I typed, Affidavit of David Whittaker in bold letters. Then I started laying out the facts. Clean, clear, and cold as mountain water. March 15th, Dad's last documented business meeting. Fully lucid. March 18th, emergency hospitalization begins. March 2027, heavy morphine protocol. March 28th, trust allegedly signed at 9 a.m. March 28th, escrow receipt time-stamped 2:15 p.m. Below that, I listed every missing file, every convenient gap in the paperwork, every witness who saw Dad's condition during those critical days. No accusations, no emotions, just dates, facts, and document numbers. The calendar on my wall showed 10 days until eviction. I circled tomorrow's date and wrote County Records, 8 a.m. in red marker. The courthouse opened at 9, but I wanted to be first in line. Sitting back, I looked at what this was going to cost me. Melissa and Todd would never speak to me again. Not that they were speaking to me now. The family photos on my walls felt like they were watching, judging whether this was worth burning. Every bridge. But you know what? Sometimes bridges need burning. Sometimes the only way forward is to light the match yourself. I got up and took down that yellow eviction notice from my front door. Hadn't thrown it away, couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I taped it right above my desk where I couldn't miss it. Nothing motivates quite like a countdown to homelessness. The empty binder sitting on my desk had court written on its spine in fresh black marker. One by one, I started filling it. The affidavit draft, Melissa's threat letter, printouts of Ron's emails documenting Dad's final weeks. Each page was another brick in the wall I was building, not to keep people out, but to protect what was right. Night had fallen while I worked. I crossed to the window and opened the blinds, looking out at the duplex courtyard. The security light cast long shadows across the concrete where I'd replaced 3 sections last summer. The garden boxes I'd built for the tenants were sleeping under their winter covers. 20 years of my life lived in the angles and edges of this place. Every repair, every upgrade, every late-night maintenance call, they were all being measured now, weighed against what I was about to do. The courtyard seemed to be asking, are you worth keeping? Are you the kind of person who'll fight for what's right, even when it hurts? I turned back to my desk and kept packing that court binder. The answer was yes. Yes, I was. Come look at this. Ron's voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. We'd been combing through email archives for hours in his home office. The kind of tedious digital archaeology that makes your eyes blur. But something in his tone made me snap to attention. He turned his monitor toward me. Notice the date stamp. 3 weeks before the trust signing. The email chain filled the screen. Messages between Dad and Marion Fletcher, his regular notary for the past decade. I remembered her. Silver-haired, meticulous, always carrying that embossing seal in a leather case that looked like it belonged in a museum. Robert, the first email began. Per our discussion, I've prepared the letter confirming your wishes for equal distribution among all 3 children. Please review the attached draft. Dad's reply came 2 hours later. Language looks good. Essential to have this on record given my condition. Want to prevent any late-night amendments while I'm under medication. My throat tightened. There it was in black and white. Dad's true intentions, sealed in digital amber. Keep reading, Ron said quietly. Marion's next message confirmed their appointment, followed by Dad's response thanking her for protecting the 3-way split. The final email included a scanned confirmation of notarization, dated March 14th, exactly 4 days before his emergency hospitalization. The letter itself, I said, already moving toward the filing cabinets. It has to be here somewhere, Ron nodded. Check the property folders from early March. Might be filed under the wrong date. You ever have one of those moments where your hands seem to know something before your brain does? I pulled open the drawer marked March 1 to 15 and went straight to a folder labeled Riverside Apartments, one off from where it should have been. There, tucked behind a routine lease renewal, was a cream-colored envelope with Marion's official seal. Inside, 2 pages of crystalline clarity. Dad's notarized declaration that his estate would be divided equally between his 3 children, with an explicit statement that any subsequent changes made while under medical treatment should be considered void. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Think this is enough? Ron was already reaching for his phone. Let me call Judge Anderson's clerk. She owes me a favor from that zoning mess last year. 20 minutes later, we had a hearing date. Next Tuesday at 2 p.m., exactly 2 days before my eviction deadline. I spent the next hour organizing everything into labeled exhibits. The email chain, the notarized letter, Dad's hospital records showing the morphine doses, a timeline matching his lucid periods against the trust's suspicious late-night signing. When it was all assembled, I called Richard Hayes, one of the attorneys who'd initially turned me down. Got his voicemail, but I didn't mind. Better to lay it out clean and clear. Mr. Hayes, David Whitaker here. I've uncovered new evidence regarding my father's estate, including notarized documents and emails that directly contradict the Midnight Trust. I'm scheduled for a hearing next Tuesday at 2 p.m. I can send you the complete file now, if you're interested in reviewing it. He called back while I was still in Ron's driveway. Email it over. If the evidence is as solid as you say, I'll take it pro bono. The sun was setting as I drove home, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. My court binder sat, buckled into the passenger seat like a silent partner. 20 years of managing properties had taught me to always secure important documents, even on short trips. Traffic was light, giving me space to practice my opening statement. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Robert Whitaker's true intentions were documented and notarized while he was of sound mind, weeks before any medical intervention. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I visualized those courthouse steps, the same steps I'd climbed countless times to file rental agreements and property transfers, but this time would be different. This time, I wasn't just handling paperwork. I was fighting for everything Dad had really wanted. Tuesday morning hit like a freight train. I'd barely slept, spending half the night double-checking exhibit numbers and rehearsing my statement until the words blurred together. You know that feeling when you've gone over something so many times, you start doubting if you're even speaking English anymore? The courthouse hadn't changed since my last visit filing property papers. Same worn marble steps, same heavy wooden doors that creaked just enough to announce everyone who entered. The security guard, Mike, nodded as I passed through the metal detector. He'd seen me enough times over the years to know I belonged. Looking sharp today, Mr. Whitaker, he said, eyeing my pressed suit and polished shoes. It was the same outfit I'd worn to Dad's funeral, though I tried not to dwell on that particular detail. Ron met me in the hallway outside Probate Court 3. His silver hair combed neat, tie perfectly straight. The original intent trail binder under my arm felt heavier with each step. Ready? He asked, though we both knew it wasn't really a question. I checked my watch. 9:47 a.m. The hearing was set for 10s, as I'll ever be. That's when I heard them. The click of expensive heels on marble, followed by the measured footsteps of what had to be at least 3 attorneys. Melissa and Todd rounded the corner like they were entering a boardroom instead of a courtroom. Their lawyers carried sleek leather briefcases that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Melissa caught my eye for just a moment, her face a mask of practiced indifference. Todd didn't even bother looking my way, too busy checking his reflection in his phone screen. The bailiff opened the doors at 9:55. All parties in the matter of the Robert Whitaker estate, please enter. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes and shafts of light. I took my place at the plaintiff's table, Ron settling into the chair beside me. Across the aisle, Melissa and Todd arranged themselves with their legal team like pieces on a chessboard. At exactly 10, the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise, the Honorable Judge Patricia Anderson presiding. Judge Anderson was exactly as I remembered from previous property hearings. Silver-rimmed glasses, no-nonsense expression, the kind of presence that commanded attention without having to ask for it. She settled into her chair, reviewed something on her desk, then looked up at the assembled parties. Good morning. We're here regarding new evidence in the matter of the Robert Whitaker estate. Who will be speaking for the plaintiff? I stood, my throat suddenly dry as autumn leaves. David Whitaker, Your Honor. Richard Hayes is representing me. She nodded, made a note. And, for the respondents, one of Todd and Melissa's attorneys rose smoothly. James Blackwood, Your Honor, representing Melissa and Todd Whitaker. Very well. Mr. Hayes, your opening statement. Richard stood, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, we're here today because Robert Whitaker's true final wishes were subverted through a document signed while he was under heavy medication. We have evidence showing that weeks before his hospitalization, Mr. Whitaker explicitly documented his intention for equal distribution among all 3 children. I watched Todd's face as Richard laid out our timeline. The smirk appeared right on cue when Richard mentioned the Midnight Trust's suspicious timing. Across the table, Melissa leaned over to whisper something to Blackwood, who nodded slightly. The air in the room felt like it was being slowly replaced with static electricity. Every breath seemed to crackle with tension. "These are serious allegations," Judge Anderson said after Richard finished. "Mr. Blackwood?" Blackwood rose with the confidence of someone billing 4 figures per hour. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims amount to nothing more than bitter speculation. The Midnight Trust was properly executed, properly notarized, and represents Robert Whitaker's clear intent to entrust his legacy to those best qualified to manage it." I glanced at my watch while he spoke. 10:27 a.m. The docket showed afternoon recess at 12:30. 48 hours until the eviction deadline. My palms felt damp against the binder's cover. "Thank you, counselors," Judge Anderson said when Blackwood finished. She adjusted her glasses, fixed me with a direct look. "Mr. Whitaker, you've alleged fraud in the execution of a legal document. That's not a claim this court takes lightly. I'll need to see substantial documentary evidence supporting your position." She gestured to the binder on our table. "Let's see your proof next." Ron straightened his tie and gave me a single, confident nod. Everything we needed was right there in black and white, waiting to be revealed. I opened the binder, and my hands didn't shake. Funny how clarity can steady you when everything's on the line. "Your Honor," Richard began, "I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit A." He handed copies to the clerk. "These are emails between Robert Whitaker and Nancy Chen, his regular notary for over 15 years. Judge Anderson studied the first page. I knew exactly what she was reading. Dad's message from 8 weeks before his death. "Nancy, please prepare the letter we discussed. Equal shares to all 3, with David retaining management of the rental properties he's handled since '05. The timestamp jumped out in bold. 9:47 a.m. March 3rd. 2 weeks before the hospital, when Dad was sharp as ever. "And here," Richard continued, "is Ms. Chen's response confirming the instructions, along with her notes about witnessing the letters signing the following day." I glanced at Melissa. She was staring at the papers like they might burst into flames. Todd had lost his smirk, replaced by something closer to indigestion. "Next," Richard said, "Exhibit B, the notarized letter itself, found in a misfiled folder." He presented the document. "Note the date stamp and notary seal, Your Honor. 3 weeks before the Midnight Trust." The letter was classic Dad, straight to the point. "I, Robert Whitaker, being of sound mind, hereby affirm my intention for equal distribution of my estate among my 3 children. Any amendments made while under medical care are to be considered void." Blackwood shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Chain of custody. These documents could have been altered or planted." "If I may," Ron spoke up from beside me. The judge nodded, and Ron stood, straightening his weathered sport coat. "I'm Ronald Pierce. I was Robert's business partner for 32 years. Those file systems, we set them up together. Every property, every deal had its place. Robert was methodical, kept everything where it belonged." "And what was Mr. Whitaker's typical process for major decisions?" Richard asked. "Deliberate, planned. He'd discuss changes weeks in advance, get everything documented." Ron's voice carried the weight of decades. When he talked about his estate, it was always equal shares. Always. Right up until they put him on that morphine drip. Judge Anderson leaned forward. "Mr. Hayes, what about the final instructions folder? If this letter was so crucial, why wasn't it where it belonged?" "An excellent question, Your Honor." I felt my pulse quicken as Richard pulled up the metadata printouts. The folder shows a deleted attachment. Timestamp matches the exact hour Robert was first administered morphine. Only 3 people had access to those files that week: Melissa, Todd, and the private nurse. The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a paperclip drop. "And who hired the nurse?" the judge asked. "Melissa did, Your Honor," I answered. "She handled all the medical arrangements." Todd shifted in his chair, tugging at his collar. Melissa's face had gone from pale to ashen. Blackwood tried to recover. "Your Honor, this is all circumstantial. The Midnight Trust bears a legitimate notary stamp." "From a different notary," Richard cut in. "One who'd never worked with Robert before. And the escrow receipt, dated 3 hours before the trust was supposedly signed, but referencing terms from the trust itself." Judge Anderson studied the timestamps, her expression unreadable. The wall clock behind her ticked past 12:15. I believe I've seen enough for now, she said finally. We'll break for lunch. I want closing arguments at 1:30 sharp. She fixed each of us with a steady look. This court takes accusations of fraudulent execution extremely seriously. I suggest all parties prepare accordingly. The gavel crack echoed through the suddenly airless room. As everyone stood, I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the solid wood under my fingers. 47 hours until the eviction deadline. The truth was out there in black and white now, but would it be enough? Ron squeezed my shoulder as Judge Anderson gathered her papers. The court will return with findings, she announced, rising to leave. I watched her disappear into chambers. The weight of everything. The duplex, Dad's real wishes, my whole future, hanging on what she'd decide after lunch. Standing for closings felt like those moments before a storm breaks. That crackling tension in the air that makes the hair on your neck stand up. I'd rehearsed this speech 100 times in my head, but now, with everything riding on the next few minutes, the words had to count. Your Honor, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The evidence tells a clear story. My father, Robert Whitaker, documented his intentions repeatedly and deliberately throughout his life. Every email, every conversation, every business decision points to one truth. He meant his estate to be divided equally among his children. I gestured to the exhibits spread across the table. The notarized letter from February 15th explicitly states his wishes. More importantly, it contains a forward-looking protection against exactly what happened. Any changes made under medical duress were to be considered void. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I continued. I didn't come to court first, Your Honor. I tried reason. I showed my siblings the maintenance records, the bills I'd paid, the years I'd invested managing these properties. I proposed mediation. I offered compromise. My throat tightened for a moment. They responded with an eviction notice. Melissa shifted in her chair, but I kept my eyes on the judge. The Midnight Trust appeared suddenly, signed during a period when our father was heavily medicated. The timing alone raises questions, but when we add the deleted files, the mismatched escrow dates, and a new notary who'd never worked with Dad before, I let that hang in the air. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Blackwood stood as soon as I finished, straightening his expensive tie. Your Honor, this is nothing but a disgruntled sibling trying to override his father's clear wishes. Mr. Whitaker has manufactured a conspiracy because he can't accept being excluded from the inheritance. I felt my jaw clench, but kept still. The Midnight Trust is properly executed, properly notarized. If Robert Whitaker wanted to change his mind at the end, that was his right. Everything else is speculation and sour grapes. Todd's attorney, Peterson, jumped in next. Furthermore, Your Honor, we're relying on Mr. Whitaker's convenient memories of conversations that can't be verified. The only concrete document is the Midnight Trust itself. Judge Anderson held up her hand, cutting him off. Counselor, let's discuss those documents. We have a notarized letter from February 15th, witnessed by Ms. Chen, a notary who handled Mr. Whitaker's business matters for 12 years. Then we have a trust dated March 10th, during his hospitalization, witnessed by a first-time notary. She lifted another paper. And these deletion timestamps from the final instructions folder coincide precisely with the start of morphine treatment. The room went silent. Even the wall clock seemed to hold its breath. The court will recess to consider findings, she announced. We'll reconvene at 4 o'clock. I glanced at Ron as we stood. His face was calm, confident. The same steady presence he'd been through this whole mess. Looking at him, I felt my shoulders relax just a fraction. We filed into the corridor, where that massive courthouse clock ticked away like a metronome. Each click seemed to whisper, eviction, pushing me 1 minute closer to that deadline lurking just over tomorrow's horizon. The next 2 hours crawled by like molasses in January. I couldn't eat, couldn't sit still, just paced the marble hallway while my stomach tied itself in knots. When the bailiff finally called us back, my heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear him. All rise, Judge Anderson swept in, the case file in her hands looking somehow heavier than before. The leather chair creaked as she settled behind the bench, adjusting her glasses with deliberate care. My fingers pressed into the wooden rail in front of me as she lifted the file. The whole gallery seemed to lean forward, waiting for her first word. Judge Anderson adjusted her glasses one final time and looked directly at me. Having reviewed the evidence presented, this court finds compelling proof that the Midnight Trust was executed, while Robert Whitaker was under significant medical duress. The timing, circumstances, and supporting documentation leave little room for doubt. My heart stopped, then started again. Furthermore, she continued, The existence of a properly notarized letter explicitly rescinding any changes made under medication, combined with the suspicious deletion of key files during the period in question, suggests deliberate concealment of Robert Whitaker's true intentions. Melissa's face went ash-white. Todd's attorney started scribbling frantically. Therefore, this court invalidates the Midnight Trust in its entirety. The estate shall be divided equally among all 3 children, as clearly documented in Robert Whitaker's February instructions. The judge's voice hardened. Additionally, the court finds clear evidence of fraud in the concealment of the notarized rescission letter. You know that moment when you can actually see someone's world crumbling? That's what I witnessed as Judge Anderson continued. The court orders Melissa and Todd Whitaker to pay restitution for all legal expenses incurred by David Whitaker in pursuing this matter. Furthermore, given the severity of the fraud attempted, additional penalties of $50,000 each are hereby assessed. The gallery erupted in whispers. Todd's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw his jaw tighten. Melissa's phone went off next. Then both started lighting up like Christmas trees. Jesus, I heard Todd mutter as he scrolled through messages. Carlson's pulling out of the downtown project. Melissa's voice carried across the aisle. What do you mean? Reconsidering our arrangement. We've worked with them for 10 years. Their attorneys huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Reputation management. Damage control. Immediate PR response needed. The clerk approached with a thick envelope. Mr. Whitaker, if you'll sign here for the deed to the duplex property. My hand was steady as I signed. Funny how that works. When your world rights itself, even your penmanship improves. I felt the weight of the envelope, heavy with justice, solid with vindication. Ron caught my eye from the back of the courtroom. He gave me that single nod, the one that said everything without saying anything, then slipped out quietly. Classic Ron. Show up when needed, vanish when the job's done. Walking home as dusk settled over the city, I felt lighter with each step. The same road I'd walked thousands of times felt different now. The old maple trees lining the street seemed to stand a little straighter, their leaves whispering approval in the evening breeze. Remember how I mentioned that mineral oil scent in Dad's garage? Standing on my porch, I caught a ghost of that smell from my neighbor's open garage. It hit me then. Some things you can't take away, no matter how hard people try. The memories, the work ethic, the simple dignity of doing what's right, they stay with you. I pulled out the key ring, closing my fingers around it until the metal pressed hard enough to sing against my palm. Each key had its own story. Front door, back door, maintenance room, storage shed. Each one represented a piece of home I'd fought to keep. Looking at that solid front door, the one I'd repainted every other spring for 20 years, I felt the truth rise up clear and strong inside me. Betrayal can't bury honor, I said to the gathering darkness, and for the first time in months, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.